Does doing the right thing cost you money? I feel like I can't even say it without
Are we going to do it?
laughing because I'm just setting it up, but...
So,
yeah.
I say double yes.
Today's podcast tackles a tricky subject, but one that almost everyone has on their radar these days: inclusivity. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, I've heard many different interpretations of it, but today our very own Director of Community, Brittany Wardell, is chatting with two studio owners who recently spoke at the Dash Bash conference in North Carolina about this very topic. Macaela VanderMost has been on the podcast before. She's an old friend and the owner of Newfangled Studios in Boston. Ricardo Roberts is the co-founder of Bien Studios in Los Angeles, a company that puts the idea of inclusivity front and center in their messaging, in their ethos, and in their work. In this interview, you'll hear how these two amazing people approach the topic, and Brittany doesn't shy away from asking some difficult questions about how to balance being inclusive with, say, running a profitable business, recruiting talent, and the sometimes tricky optics that modern companies have to consider for better or worse. It's an awesome conversation, so sit back and meet Brittany, Macaela, and Ricardo right after you hear from one of our amazing alumni.
Hi, my name is Alyssa Coburn. I'm a digital graphic designer working for a large corporation. Animation bootcamp changed the trajectory of my entire career, and I know that sounds probably very dramatic, but it's true. As a kind of a traditional static graphic designer, the world of motion and the world of motion design just wasn't something that I had ever really even considered. But when I quickly realized that my career, would be better suited to have that skill set, I went ahead with Animation Bootcamp, and I am so glad that I did. The courses were challenging, and they really pushed me, in ways. It challenged me to learn skills and develop skills and even my way of thinking and creatively thinking in ways that I hadn't even thought possible. And I'm so glad that I did it. I can say with all honesty that I now have the position that I have, and I work in the industry that I do because of Animation Bootcamp and because of everything that I got out of School of Motion. So truly, I could not recommend this school and this course more than I do. Thank you. Thank you, School of Motion, and thank you, Animation Bootcamp.
We have two fantastic studio owners with us today, Macaela and Ricardo. Thank you so much for getting on the podcast with me. We are pumped to have you here. We've had Macaela on the podcast before, and we've also chatted with David, the sound designer from Bien Studios. But for those just tuning in, do you just mind introducing yourselves and a bit about your studios?
Hey, I'm Macaela. I'm the owner and executive creative director of Newfangled Studios. We've been around since 2009, and we make a lot of ads primarily for social media, and we do both live action and animated, illustration, design, and inclusion is kind of our thing. So I'm excited to be here talking about it with you guys.
Yeah, and Brittany, it's also amazing to be here. Shout out to Joey for also having us on, and for having David Jeffers on previously. But Bien is the inclusive motion design studio. We focus on exclusively motion design, animation, illustration, and we have been around since 2017. Our thing is inclusion. Like everything that we do, that's baked into our DNA. Like that's what we're all about. It's not like an afterthought. It's like that is the primary thing. So that's what we do. We're based in LA, and we have global staff. So we have staff in Ireland, in Spain, in Panama, Argentina, and all across the US. So we try to have like a very global POV on things.
I love it. So both of you also recently talked at Dash Bash earlier this year and had very impactful talks on this topic. And I find it interesting that you are two very different people with studios on different sides of the country and have still come together with this overlapping mission to make this industry more inclusive. So I'm sure you have different stories and examples that led you both to the same mission. And that's where I'd like to start the conversation today. So we'll start with Ricardo, since this is your first time here. but just kind of figuring out, how did inclusivity become a part of your studio's DNA?
Yeah, so I think it started like with my personal journey and like how I arrived at the United States as an immigrant. So like I moved here, I didn't know English. I couldn't I started kindergarten like at a public school in Southeast Raleigh, and it's like I can't learn, I can't make friends, I can't like do anything without knowing the language. So it was kind of like a traumatic experience, I guess, in a way. But that really is what started me on becoming multicultural and having a multicultural worldview. And then I also want to credit my mom because she was a cultural diversity trainer for the public healthcare system in North Carolina for many, many years. And so just hearing her talking about, cultural diversity in general, even though it was for a different industry, like that's what really kind of got me started down this road of like,
wow,
an interest in becoming multicultural, but also being an advocate for people and for diversity and inclusion.
So this was more of a personal journey for you throughout your entire life that you then brought into your professional goals when you started BN.
Yeah.
So did that also kind of, obviously that's something you experienced in every asset of life. Were you also doing this before you even were in motion design or even learning this stuff? Was this already something that you were kind of bringing into other jobs that you had prior?
No, because I couldn't. It wasn't a thing.
Right.
Like, and this speaks to some of the other questions that we may cover. But at my previous company, it just wasn't a part of the conversation at all. Like inclusion, diversity. It may have come up as a client mandate, like, hey, we need to make this cast a little more inclusive, but it wasn't a studio-led thing. And I think it's just reflective of the times and atmosphere in this country and the global atmosphere. So that's why I started BN. It's like, hey, like this is important to me. And as a business owner, I also wanted to have like this reason for like having a business, right? So to me, it can't be just, about business and profits and things like that. I have to have like a activist twist to it. So that's why I started BN with Hung, my co-founder.
I love that.
He's the same. He believes the same.
Yes. Shout out to Hung. He's awesome as well. Macaela, I will also pass that same question to you as well for Newfangled Studios and how inclusivity became a part of your studio's DNA.
Sure. I think it's pretty similar to Ricardo. It came from my own maybe trauma growing up of feeling othered. And I've always been very interested in, creating things that would be able to show a little bit more depth and breadth on the screen. And growing up, I grew up in the 90s and there was no representation for queer people at all.
Yeah.
And in fact, the word gay was like an insult back then. It was like the most common insult used. And so it was a difficult time to grow up as a gay person and as a closeted person because there was no role model of what success could look like. And as I sort of stepped into my power as a content creator, I realized that we have this huge opportunity to put people on the screen, to shine a light where maybe others have not. And so back in 2009, when I started Newfangled, I would try desperately to get gay representation in our videos, and I would just fail every time. But I tried really hard.
Yeah.
But at the beginning, it was mostly about gay representation because that's where my, I was desperate for it, on a personal level. Mm-hmm. And then as I think, DEI, DIB is a journey, right? We don't start at the end and then say, okay, we're done. And so that was my starting point. But once I started to learn more about the value and the power of more of that global POV, I started to realize hey, there's way more to this than getting gay people on screen. Okay. And so that point of view started to evolve to, everything from socioeconomic, status to, physical and intellectual disability and ability, race, all types of things, age, gender identity.
Yeah.
So I would say by maybe, 2009, I started the company. By probably about 2015, it was fully baked into our DNA. It was just part of who we were. And it wasn't really a question that if we were working on something, what our stance was going to be. We were going to make sure that we had representation on and behind the camera. And we've just realized what incredible power we have to combat stereotype and to let people see themselves on screen, and also just let people see that, hey, you can be successful in this world in a number of different ways, no matter what background you're from. And so that's why it feels so sort of powerful for me personally, because I didn't have that growing up. But that was just the beginning of it. That was sort of what got me on the journey. And then once I started surrounding myself with all of these people with interesting points of views, that just kept expanding and expanding. And I'm just still on that journey now.
So you both started as being your own. You used the term just being othered before. And I really like that. Like, you both just felt like you were on the outside of this thing. And so then it was, first it started just initially wanting to get, awareness brought to your own community. And then you realize everybody really could use a little bit of a spotlight and some help. And so it just grows from there. But it's amazing, that growth from where you start, already knowing that there's a mission to be had, but just realizing how big that mission is and how many different types of people that'll impact. Some people it might impact too. A question I have, both of you are parents. So has being a parent impacted your efforts or your views towards prioritizing this? Maybe not even just in this motion design industry, but at large. And if it has, then in what ways has it?
Yeah, I'll take this one if that's okay. and you go too, Macaela. But I'm excited about this question because I have a 13-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old boy, and I learned so much from them, right? The way they interact with people, the way they look at the world is completely different than when I was growing up in the 90s, right? So seeing them, and they have this lens of inclusivity built in. They just do not see things the way that people did when I was growing up. So I learned a lot from them, and they're extremely inclusive. And in terms of how it has impacted me and how I carry myself and how I act and how I run the business, I'm a believer in action. I don't like words. Actions speak louder than words. You have to put your money where your mouth is and do things. So I want to be a role model for them and how they act. Are they intentional about what they do? Do they make the right choices? I have to model that behavior, right? And so to me, it makes me so proud that I can, show things that we're doing. We can talk about, hey, this voiceover artist is disabled, X, Y, Z. We talk about the work that we do, and it gives me a reason to connect with them as well, because kids, they don't care about animation for, some company, right? They just want to see cool stuff. And if I can show them that and I can tell them about how we did it, my hope is that it may carry on to, what they do with their lives and just how they act in general. So
I love that.
Huge influence and huge push.
I think that
to be better.
I love everything that you said. I agree with all of that. It feels like it's more just this thought process. Right now, people need to take this extra step to think, is this inclusive? Am I missing something? And I think, but by instilling that in your kids, hopefully that's not a secondary thought. It's just part, without even realizing that they're being inclusive, it's just part of that process. And it's not something they have to take a step back and double check. They just know it because it's in that process initially. So that's great that you're taking those steps with your kids. Macaela, would you like to also add to that at all?
Sure. Yeah, I'm pretty passionate about my kids. I have 8 and 5-year-old daughters. And I'll say we were, I think, 8 months pregnant with my first daughter when gay marriage became legalized. And that feeling of I can't even tell you the range of emotion that I felt knowing that my daughter would come into the world never having lived in a place where, my wife and I are her moms, it was invalid. And so I think, what you said, Ricardo, of like just the amount of progress that's been made and being able to see that, I think is a big motivation to me. When Ariel is on screen and she's Black now, or my kids are watching cartoons and almost all of them have gay characters or bi characters. People live in homes with single parents and all these are cartoons. Like that wasn't a thing when we were kids. So seeing the progress makes me want to keep going because it's like, it's working, Yeah. But then last year, my daughter was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, which is, people hear the word diabetes and they think about type 2, but type 1 is very different and it's a debilitating disease. It's really pretty awful. And my daughter, for the first time, became othered, where there's so many little things that single her out. She has to go to the nurse 5 times a day. She can't eat anything without seeing the nurse first. Or, we were at gymnastics yesterday and they said, good job. And they handed everyone like a pack of gummy bears. And like, it's not that she can't have gummy bears. She just can't have surprise gummy bears that we didn't plan for. And so I'm starting to now see my daughter experience otherness, like that same thing that I experienced for being a queer woman growing up. And so there's still so much more to do. And so I'm motivated not only by seeing how far we've come, but by seeing how far we need to go in society. And so I did actually recently put out some information on how to represent invisible disabilities in your work. And that is inspired by my daughter. And she has to wear medical devices on her body and people don't know what they are. And it would just be so amazing if the media portrayed that, that and many other invisible disabilities. So, I guess to answer the question, it's all about forward progress. And the next generation represents that. And then of course, when they're your own children, like it just means so much. So, that's how they, that's how my older daughter especially impacts it for me.
And we are crying 10 minutes in. Excellent work, everyone. That's really inspiring, though. And I think it is so amazing to be able to see some of that progress finally after so much hard work, having some of it pay off at a large scale and knowing that the world that you're building is the one that your kids are going to grow up in. Oh, gosh. Next question, quick.
You know what? I just want to say too, Macaela, like I love how positive you are about things because a lot of people I speak with are not. They tend to kind of look at the negative side. Like we've got such a long way to go, and I totally agree with that. But I tend to look at things from an optimist perspective, and if you look at the facts and if you look at representation in media, and when I say media, I mean like TV, television, music, advertising, etc. Yeah, like there is some change happening. There's quite a bit of change, and I think sometimes you just have to look at like what was being done in the early 2000s and 90s versus now, and it's like, whoa, holy shit, there's a stark difference. So I love that you feel the same way. Like there's so much more to be done, but damn it, we're making some progress.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, the whole thing is a journey, right? And I think some people make the mistake of thinking like, we're going to do this thing. And there's not really an end to it. It's sort of wherever you start, you're like, okay, I'm starting here and I'm going to move forward. And then in 10 years, you're going to look back and go, wow, I came so far. But you also have to realize that there's still so much that you don't know that you don't know. And that's what it is. Like once you realize that there's something that you don't know, then you can do the work to know more about it. But for me, that's the biggest thing that I found is when, it's like anybody who's younger thinks that they know all the things and it's just, you don't know what you don't know. And that's really at the heart of the inclusion journey for me is what else do I not know about and how can I know about it?
It's very humbling
that's a huge point. I'm sorry, Brittany, I said to say something. Sorry.
What?
It's a huge point that you make because, Macaela, I feel the same way. Like I'm just now beginning my journey. Like I'm just now learning about all of these different things and ways that we can be diverse. But it's all about like, hey, we're all humans, so let's find that common ground and like let's work together to improve things, the landscape in general. And so we tell like all of our clients, like, hey, look, we're not DEI experts per se. You know, we are the experts in motion design, but like we learn so much from our clients, you know, and freelancers and staff and people that we bring in, we're constantly learning. And I think that's kind of the attitude that you have to really do this, and that clients need to have as well. Like when you're walking into this, like, this is all uncharted territory. Like you just have to do it with the best intention in mind, and know that you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to need to learn a lot on the job every single day.
Yeah.
That's
And
right.
you're going to learn as you go. It's a continuous process of learning and accepting and humbling just throughout.
And apologizing.
And apologizing.
You have to be able to admit when you're wrong. And usually, you know, it takes a minute to get there to realize that you're wrong. But then when you do, you have to be able to admit it. And that's a big part of the journey.
Absolutely. Wow. That was an amazing place to kind of go to our next part. So we are going to get a little bit into where we're at now in this industry and kind of who's leading what. That's leading to this impact. But I also want to direct a question to Macaela regarding your talk at Dash Bash. You received a standing ovation, with Ricardo and myself included in that. It was amazing. Yeah. I think a lot of people appreciated your honesty around this topic and your examples personally and professionally that you shared. That kind of brought about the rebranding that you had for Newfangled and your North Star concept. And so I really wanted to give you that opportunity to kind of share that concept with a larger audience, and if you want, what was leading up to that rebranding that made you feel that was the appropriate time for it and for this idea moving forward, and what that North Star concept is that represents Newfangled's values.
Sure. So Newfangled's been in business since 2009. And when we first started, I should say me, and I didn't have any employees when I started. You know, it was really like, let's do this. Let's get the studio off the ground, right? And then once there was a little bit more feeling of safety, my own personal values started to be able to come out more. And it didn't have to feel like, you know, fight or flight all the time just to like get the studio off the ground. But they the values didn't evolve over time, but there wasn't a time really until 2020 where I sat down and tried to define it all. I knew what the values were, but if you asked me, it would be like a 10-minute question where I'd ramble and try to explain it. Much, I guess, like this. But I really wanted to, and I think COVID had a lot to do with it. Like, you know, it was sort of the time where you were redefining everything and reevaluating everything. Yeah. And we wanted to say, like, who are we and what do we stand for? And I think we all have at this point, we were maybe 30 people. I'd grown well beyond, it being me and my values. And so we took the time to sit down and define it. And we looked at our past and said, well, inclusion has always been important to us. And I think it was like 2016 or 2017, we put out a series called Untapped, which I think is what kind of put us on the map for inclusion. But even prior to that, we were trying our best to fight the fight, though we hadn't quite stepped into our power with that yet. But anyway, we came up with this concept of the North Star. And it was ultimately the catalyst of our logo. So if you look at our logo, it has the N over it, which is sort of shaped as a rainbow. So throwback to my ties. And then in the middle of it, it has a star with 4 points. And at the top and the bottom are, what we call our push-pull. So when you think of the two things in your life that you want both of them, but sometimes one has to give a little bit to allow the other, that's your push-pull. And for us, at the top of the star, the top point is creativity and innovation. That's why we're in this. We love that. We're all passionate artists. We want to be creative. We want to be innovative. But sometimes, you have to get reined back in a little bit by business results. So at the bottom of the star is business results. And we are always thinking about that push-pull of, hey, let's make sure that we're grounded in the client's goals and objectives, but still try to push it creatively and be as innovative as we can. And then the left and the right points of the star are sort of our grounding pieces where you can't, those are anchors, right? Those don't push pull, and those are our values. So on the left-hand side is respect and inclusion. And that's what we've been talking about here today. And we added respect into it because it's important to be inclusive, and it's important to be considerate of all types of people, but we also just want to think about general respect, the way that we treat each other, the way that we respect one another's role in the company, whether you're a producer, a strategist, or an animator. We respect each other's viewpoint and what they bring to the table, as well as we're inclusive with each other within, the work that we put on the screen, and just try to keep that lens. So that's the left grounding anchor. And then the right is forward progress. And that can mean many things to many different people. So to our clients, it could have more of a business twist to it. To us personally, it means that every single one of us want to continue to grow in our career and as artists, and we're here to build and grow things. And then from a very high level, big picture, it's society. It's what we were talking about where, I think about how I grew up and how some of the things that I had trouble with are not going to be a problem for my kids because that's forward progress. So how can we continue to think about that big picture and the legacy that we're living? So to just kind of like recap that, push-pull are the top and bottom. So creativity and innovation is push-pulling with business results. And then the left and the right are your grounding principles, your anchors, and that's respect and inclusion, and forward progress. So that's the Newfangled North Star. We use it in everything that we do. We judge our hires against it. We judge new clients against it. Projects, do we want to take this on? Do we want to give a discount to something that maybe doesn't have the budget because we want to do it? All types of decisions are judged against the Newfangled North Star, and it really is our guiding light in terms of how we run the show.
And Macaela, at the end of her standing ovation talk, had 2 microphones in the audience for people to come up and talk about their North Stars, because it can be applied to your personal life and balance or lack thereof professionally. So it was really insightful, and I think just like self-reflective for a lot of people to just take a moment to think about how that can be applied to their own situations and maybe put some things in perspective for them.
I think like if you want to apply it to anyone who's listening, if you want to apply that to yourself, the left and the right are the things you won't budge on. So what are your anchors and what will you absolutely not budge on? And the top and the bottom are the things that they're both important. They both need to be there, but sometimes one may take away from another a little bit, and that's okay. That's a push-pull.
Yeah. So Ricardo, I have a question for you too in relation to your Dash Bash talk, which was super insightful and talked about so many different creative ways that you have been able to be an inclusive studio and spearheading things like the InMoDe methodology back in 2017. So just wanted to kind of explore what went into the decision to move in this direction. It sounds like you started in this direction. And what changes have you noticed between when you first started this studio and this initiative and now?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Brittany. Like this was something that we created, like the BN positioning. We did market research, and this was part of our strategy since day one, because we saw there was like a need for this. No one that we know of in the motion design space specifically was talking about, inclusive motion design. Like that did not exist. So we saw this sort of white space in the market, and we thought that would be an amazing place to start a business because it aligns with what we want to do. It aligns with, a business need, and just who we are as people. And so when we started the studio, that was kind of like, that was our flag. It's like, this is what we're doing. But it was extremely tough going at like the first 2 years, like we were like, oh shit, we made the wrong decision. Why are we starting a studio based on these values? Because like it was hard to get work, you know, if I'm being completely honest. And the good thing about it was that people who wanted to work with us, they wanted to work with us because of that reason. Like we planted that flag from day one. And I know, Macaela, like I know exactly what you're probably feeling. Like early on, that wasn't like a big part of the company and position in DNA. But as soon as you said, hey, this is what we do, like this is the beacon that we're putting out into the world. Do you like it or do you not? Do you have the same values or not? And then all of a sudden, people with those same values start coming to you for your point of view. So I can really relate to that. And, you know, when we started, it was, you know, like I said, it was very, very tough. And then things started changing. And we started becoming known. We got some momentum. The world changed, right? So many different factors changed in the world. And then all of a sudden, people are like, yeah, I want to work with Bien because of this InMoDe or inclusive motion design methodology and just way of thinking and just who we are as people and like what we stand for. So yeah, things have changed tremendously, like drastically since 2017. You know, it's only almost 6 years.
But what can you explain that inclusive methodology?
Yeah. So inclusive motion design is just kind of what we call the methodology that we use. It's basically a scientific method. So everything that we do follows this certain process. And basically the high level of it is everything that we do, we want to be representative for, you know, people on screen and behind the scenes. So it's all about on-screen and off-screen representation and authenticity in everything that we do. So with the on-screen piece, that's sort of, it's not easy, but it's maybe easier now because I think clients, they want diversity. I think the consumer, they want diversity and inclusion. They expect it now. So, you know, we've kind of like figured that piece out for the most part of like, how can we be, you know, representative in creative, unique ways? How can we combat stereotypes on screen? The behind the scenes portion of inclusive motion design is the tough part because there is a lack of, I would say, senior level talent in our industry, of BIPOC talent, you know, of diverse talent in general. So everything that we do kind of, to use your terminology, that's sort of our North Star, Macaela. It was like, how can we increase representation, inclusivity on the screen and behind the scenes? And so we have a whole process that we use to achieve that. And then a lot of different tactical things that we put in place that we use as a studio and that we want all studios to use. Like that's another thing is like we're an open book. So everything that we do, we want others to take the idea, make it better, like put it out there, modify it, make it yours. Because for us, our goal is to change the industry. The motion design industry specifically. I don't think I can change the world.
You can
that's
try.
grandiose. But I can change the motion design industry like a little bit. So that's inclusive motion design and how, you know, how we think and what it stands for.
I love that.
At the high level.
Yeah. But I think that at that high level, it makes it easier to kind of figure out how you can apply it to wherever you're at. Whether you are already in a studio with excellent clients or if you're just starting out, there's somewhere to begin. And I want to kind of circle back to a piece that you had mentioned about how it is becoming more of a demand now. And I'm just curious about the reaction versus proaction to that. Like, I wonder if it's becoming easier to convince clients or stakeholders that representation is important because there's been a shift in consumers' expectations and they will correct that? Or is this a demand coming, how do I even word this? Is this a demand coming from consumers or are consumers reacting to the work being produced by studios like yourselves? Is it more your clients are coming to you and saying, we want to be more inclusive, this is what we want to do, and then the consumers are just like, all right, awesome, this is great, we love this? Or are consumers really the ones directing those client decisions, saying we will not buy this product unless we see this sort of representation and initiative being created? Do you think that there is one kind of leading the other, or does it depend on the client in your experiences with these projects?
I think there's a third option, Brittany, and that's that the evolution of, we talk about the market in the United States anyway, is we are the most diverse that we've ever been. So, between immigration and between, different communities coming together, luckily we are not as segregated as we once were. Things are better than they used to be. And if you just look at the numbers, while, people of color are still a minority, they're not a minority in the way that they used to be. And so I think it's both. I think corporations recognize that I'm in advertising, ads need to mirror back the communities that they're created for. And so I think that's one piece, is that smart marketers know that. And then I also think that individual people want to see themselves and the people that they love reflected in the advertising. So for Ricardo, it may be immigrants. For me, it may be gay people. For my daughter, it might be somebody with a glucose monitor on their arm. But everybody wants to see themselves represented. And the more diverse we become as a nation, the more everyone's going to feel that way. So I think it's all of those powers working together, the more diverse we become as a country.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Macaela. And I always like to go back to like the beginnings of advertising, like in the 1960s, like Madison Avenue, like what that advertising reflected was society, right? It was very, very different. And it's my belief that brands started understanding like, hey, there's like the world was very different then. And so they would look at things as like, what are the ethnic groups here in the United States? There's African American, there's Asian, there's Latinx. That was kind of the big three. And so they started realizing like, hey, there's increased buying power there. And that buying power will only increase over, the next decades. So it wasn't until like the 70s, I think it was, when like McDonald's and I think it was like Jell-O, they started like marketing specifically towards like African Americans. And then you saw kind of the splintering of agencies and content and TV commercials and print ads like being tailored to a certain demographic. And I think it's because these corporations figured out like, hey, there's tremendous buying power there. So it's an untapped market. Yeah. So I think that's kind of what started it. But I also think that for many years there was a fear of advertisers. Like they felt like, hey, if I'm not targeting the majority in the United States, that I'm going to alienate some of my, my core consumers. Right. And so I think that there was just kind of like this fear and the stigma there. And I think that's kind of it's sort of a remnant of where this country was back then. It was like, it was segregated. That was like a real thing. And this institutional racism it's like built into the system. And so it's going to take a long time for us to get out of that and get away from it. But I think now brands, they've seen that like, hey, like I can market to a multicultural audience and I won't alienate anyone. In fact, now the new generations, they embrace that, and it's a safe thing for me to do. It's not going to hurt my bottom line. And then consumers also, they're like, hey, like this brand, or, like I think I always go back to like Always, that campaign, like Run Like a Girl, like that was huge, transformational in our industry. And I think people go back to things like that and they say, well, Always is doing this, so I demand that of, anyone that you expect me to switch over to, any type of competing brand. So it is like, it's so intertwined, but I feel like together we've done a better job of reflecting society. But I do feel like there are brands that are genuine, and I think agencies and production companies about this, like what they really feel. And it's aspirational, and it just pushes society in a really interesting way.
I think technology has a lot to do with it too, Ricardo. Like, you know, if you go back to the 70s, they had to go. I mean, that was even when we used terminology that was all military, like your target market, right? All of your terminology had to do with military. But anyway, you know, back in the 70s, if you were going to put out an ad, it was a billboard or a TV ad, and you had to cater to the lowest common denominator. Like, who is the majority, and let's talk to them. We can't talk to everybody because we're making one ad and putting it on TV. And as technology and targeting has gotten, you know, more and more powerful, I can go onto YouTube and I can make 15 different ads and, you know, display it toward 15 different types of people and let those people see themselves on screen. And I think that, you know, as that evolved, maybe people started to get more comfortable not only showing, you know, immigrants to immigrants and gay people to gay people and black people to black people. I think we as an industry started getting more comfortable, like, oh, we can have black people in our ads and we don't have to only, you know, show black people the black people. We can show white people the black people. We can show black people the white people. And it started to mix up a little bit in a really wonderful way. But I think that it was a stepping stone when technology evolved where we could say, hey, we do want to be inclusive toward this particular group. And now we have the tools to do it. Where it used to just be like event marketing, right? It used to be like, oh, I want to support gay people. I'm not going to do it on TV because that's the largest common denominator, but I'll like support Pride, or I'll, you know, put something up in Key West or P-Town. Yeah. And you can do that with a lot of different markets, and it's sort of small and private. But I do want to counter something that you said, Ricardo, where brands feel like it's safe now, with what happened with Bud Light, because these tools have gotten so powerful and it has gotten so expected that we're inclusive. I think that brands have started to feel more safe, and, you know, whether you want to say it backfired or you want to say whatever you want to say about it, but there now have been instances where inclusion is being called woke, and there's this whole movement against the woke media and against woke corporations. And I think we've backslid a little bit from where it felt unexpected and brave, and then it felt expected and the right thing to do, and almost like wrong. If you weren't doing it, you'd get called out. And the pendulum has swung a little bit the other way, where there are certain populations that are a little taboo, and if you include them, you should expect some backlash from people who are anti-woke. So I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, no, Macaela, it's a really good point. And I think, you know, branding and marketing is really just about, you know, for larger corporations, I think it should be values-based marketing, right? Like you should really hone in on what that brand stands for and broadcast it to the world. So I think for some brands, you know, our style or approach is not right. It's just not right. Because if their constituent is a certain type of people that will reject these values, then, you know, for them, from a branding perspective, it makes no sense. But I think some brands, like I use Nike as an example, you know, they're all about diversity and inclusion. They take a stand on social issues. Those are the brands that I'm talking about and I want to work with, and you know, that I think have a progressive place in society that can move things forward.
Would you ever want to work at a brand work for a brand that historically is not progressive because it would give you a seat at the table to make change?
That is a
great question, Macaela. Take the wheel.
As you shook your head at first, and then you're like, "Oh, wait, a seat at the table."
I would say
now we're getting into it.
It depends on who it is, but you know, it's one of those things. Corporations are so huge and so difficult to change. I don't know if anything that we do could influence or change how a company behaves. It's a really tough question. I think it just really depends on who it is.
I have some clients who I think as a whole, as corporations, have good values, but there's individuals within these giant corporations who I think probably are good people with good intentions who have not started on their inclusion journey and don't know what they don't know. And there's been projects that I've been on that I wanted to just say, I don't want to be part of this, because it can be hard to hear a point of view that doesn't reflect something you believe in so strongly. But I think it's worth the fight to stay at the table, because even if you don't win that battle, you've made yourself clear and you may make an impact that you're not aware that you've made. But I can't tell you how many times I've been on a project since I've stepped into my power and started being a little stronger about these things, and heard a point of view that was very uncomfortable for me, and then said, well, wait a minute, have you thought about it this way? And that person has actually turned around in how they thought about it, maybe out of embarrassment, but either way, it's worked. And I think an earlier me might have said, F this, I don't want to be at this table. I don't want any part of this. But I think the hard thing can sometimes be the right thing, which is like, stick through it. If Bud Light offered me a job, I would take it, and I would probably be the biggest pain in their butt, of like, you hired Newfangled Studios. We're going to do it the Newfangled Studios way. And I may lose the battle, but I think if everybody can take small micro actions in their own corner of the world, even if their corner of the world is, a tougher place to do it, then it'll push everything forward. But we have to be careful to not only want to do work for me anyway, I try to be careful to not only want to do work for places that completely align with my values, because then what change am I making?
That's really interesting, Macaela, and I appreciate that perspective, because I honestly haven't considered it before. I was more like you maybe previously, like, like this is what we believe in, this is what we're doing. You're either on the bus or off it, and I don't care.
She's on the front line.
I haven't thought about it, and I think it's really valid and something that now that you mention it, like, if Bud Light or whoever came to us, like, we would do it the Bien way, and we would not falter from that path, so
you might get fired. At least you got fired trying.
That's why I plant a seed, and even just one person working there's brain to start a shift. And I love that this came up naturally. I don't want to stop talking about it.
We'll get back to the interview in just a second, but first, I want to make sure that you are aware of our free weekly newsletter, Motion Mondays. This is a 5-minute email you'll get each Monday that will keep you up to date on new tools, events, and news in the worlds of animation, design, 3D, and visual effects. Head to motionmondays.com to sign up for free. And now let's get back to the interview.
The question I was going to pose that covers this exactly, and maybe a little bit more, was just kind of, how do you navigate the studio's values and goals versus the individual, like your team of individuals working on that studio work, and that individual's values and goals, plus the client's values and goals as well. So Macaela, you kind of answered that with a client in mind, but have you ever even had like someone on your team be uncomfortable because of their own personal beliefs or values to work on something? And if you have had that experience, where do you kind of even go from there? You don't want to make everybody happy. It's going to be uncomfortable, but it is supposed to have that mission in mind. So how do you navigate all those different levels of values?
Well, I think being public with the studio's values, like we have with our North Star and like Bien has as well, people know what we stand for. And I think the first piece is that we attract people probably who align with those values, but that's not going to have a 100% success rate, right? And you're going to come into situations where it's okay to disagree. And I think one of the wonderful things about the journey that we're on with DEI is that it's okay to have discomfort. And in fact, if you are unable to talk about an uncomfortable topic, there's never going to be change. And so people on my team anyway, I hope feel comfortable to talk to each other, to talk to me, to talk to an outside consultant if they need that support, on anything that's making them uncomfortable, because like I said, you don't know what you don't know. And you may be, working on something and you're putting forward a harmful stereotype and you don't realize you're doing it. And unless someone on your team feels safe enough to voice that on your team, on the client's team, a consultant, then you're not going to know when you're going to do that harm. And so I think that it's healthy to be able to disagree, or healthy to be able to bring that up. And how you navigate it it's really just talking about it.
And we talked about how having your goals on your homepage and making it very clear when somebody chooses to work with you, they know what they're getting themselves into, and they're signing up for you specifically because of who you are as a studio. So does doing the right thing cost you money? I feel like I can't even say it without
Are we gonna do it?
laughing because I'm just setting it up, but it is doing a lot of good, obviously. But I do want to also talk about the hardships and the struggles that go along with this mission you guys are leading. So do you get pushback from anyone, from any clients or things like that?
So
yeah,
I say double yes.
Yeah. I lost a job last year with a big client because I'm not going to give away any details so that anybody knows who it is, but it was a job and they're still my client now. We're still friends, but we proposed a certain campaign. And then when we pulled in somebody from that community as a consultant to essentially say, like, we want to make sure this is accurate and there's nothing harmful in here. That consultant said, like, oh no, like, this is beyond not accurate. You can't do this. And when we brought that to our client didn't want to hear it at all. And in fact, pulled the job from us and gave it to another studio. And as hurtful as that was, it's when you feel kind of good about it, because you're like, well, hey, we're not doing it. We did bring this to your attention. We brought you a consultant who explained the issues, and the client decided to pull it away from us and give it to someone else. And I think that they thought we were being maybe a little too woke on the topic, and went with someone else on the job. But, that certainly cost us money. And I think that there's other things that you need to do to be inclusive. We're a completely remote studio, and a lot of that has to do with inclusion. We were based in Boston. I mean, our headquarters are in Boston. But there's not an extremely diverse set of creative talent here. And so by expanding that geographically, that comes with a lot of operational logistics, from IT to paying taxes in a ton of different places.
It does?
Yeah. You would know at School of Motion. I think you guys are like the first fully remote company. But yeah, I mean, it gives you incredible access to more diverse talent, but it's like really expensive and a giant headache. So there are things that cost money. There may be perspectives that cost you jobs. But I think at the end of it all, I still think it's worth it, probably even financially. I think you still probably come out on top.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree with that 100%, Macaela. So to answer succinctly, yes, it does cost us money every single day. It's costing us money right now. But as Macaela said, like that's what we chose, right? We knew what we were getting into. And to make change, you have to spend money and you have to spend time. And a lot of what we do is time-based, right? So we do a lot of mentorships, we do apprenticeships, we have so many different programs that we have in place. And so all of those programs require me, my business partner, our staff, like time and attention, because you can't just throw money at a problem. You can't just be like, oh, we're gonna support these 3 nonprofits, that believe in our mission and just write a check every year. That's too easy, right? That's not doing anything. So we put a lot of time and effort and heart into mentoring young junior talent, because for us, like, that's how we know that we can change the industry.
Yeah.
We do what no other studio except for Macaela and there's a few, but when I say no other studio, I mean generally, like, they will not take the time to, hunt for diverse talent, right? Because a lot of times you're looking for a specific type of talent, and on the surface level, it doesn't exist. So you have to spend 3 or 4 or 5 more hours looking for that talent again. And so we have a resourcing manager. That's her job, is finding talent. And a lot of times it can seem like an impossible task. So we're spending a lot of time on that, right? We spend a lot of time with mentees. Like, we have, I don't know how many mentees we have right now at the studio, but it's time consuming for all of us, right? To give them attention, to give them feedback, advice on how to survive and how to thrive in this industry. So it's like all these different things. It's really intense. So it costs a lot of time. And then just specifically with Double the Line, it's an AICP initiative that we sort of took on and adapted it to the motion design world, where you take a line item on a budget and you double it, and you bring on a junior BIPOC talent. And so it could be for like a week or 5 weeks. And usually we ask the client to cover that fee, but sometimes they don't have budget, or just unfortunately it's not in the cards, their budget's capped. So 9 times out of 10, when that happens, we take on that fee. Like, we take that out of our, profit margin, because again, that's what we believe for. That's what we believe in, that's what we believe in. And that's why we do what we do. So you have to be all in. Like, it's not for the weak at heart. And it's not for people who are just sort of like, hey, I want to maybe make a difference. You have to really go all in.
You have to commit,
and be prepared to spend lots of time and lots of money on this. But in the end, it is totally 100% worth it for many different reasons.
Ricardo, you're talking about a lot of the programs I know BN is running that really are making inclusivity a priority, and also just making it accessible to all these different groups of people. I wonder if one of those ones you're mentioning is referring to the Fly on the Wall project?
Yes, it is actually. I'm so glad you brought that up, Brittany. So Fly on the Wall is this fairly new initiative, right, that we have, where basically we bring in underrepresented talent from anywhere in the world, and we bring them into our Slack channels, right? So we're a fully remote studio. So we realize, like, hey, this is one way that we can bring people on, and we can train them, and we can show them inclusive motion design by them just being around on projects, right? So when I was, coming up in the creative world, like, you had to be in a city and you had to be in an office to learn anything. So now we said, hey, let's lean into the remote working and hybrid working kind of lifestyle and the benefits that it brings. So we just bring people on. They sign NDAs, obviously, and we put them sometimes on client calls and on all of our Slack channels for projects, so they can actually see in real time how things are getting done, how we tackle challenges. And they're basically on kickoff calls, they're on review calls, they see the whole production come to life from beginning to end. So it's something that I would recommend any studio out there try. Fly on the Wall. It's just what it sounds like. Like, they don't really have a lot of input. Maybe at some points there are questions, but the key is it's easy to do for a studio. It literally takes 0 time. You can bring in 1 person or 5 people. All you have to do is plug them into your Slack, and they become a fly on the wall, literally, and they can learn so much by doing that. And you start building relationships as well with people as a studio. So it's just one of the things.
How do you find the people who want to be part of the program?
So we put it out there on social media. We have relationships with different schools as well. And basically, like they just...
I know a school.
There was a fully remote school with a global student body.
That's really good motion design. Yeah.
we just have these relationships, and people know that we're doing kind of like different and innovative things. So they start coming to us, and, you know, they start asking about these programs. And that's just one way that like we try to like go above and beyond and you know,
and
change
it costs
the
you
industry.
nothing. Isn't that amazing that you can make that big of an impact to X amount of
Come on, it's costing you time. Don't like I don't want you to discount the effort that you're putting in. You're recruiting these people.
Yeah.
I would imagine that there's an operational aspect to having them involved. There's NDAs to be signed. There's Slack channels to be built. I'm sure there's an orientation. They probably have a point person. So I think that this is awesome that you're doing it, and I want to know more. But don't undersell yourself. You are giving time and money to this cause. It doesn't cost you nothing, and you're doing it anyway, which is awesome.
True. Thank you, Macaela. And I'll just say that, like, if you compare this initiative to, like, say, hiring hiring someone, hiring an apprentice or an intern, it's just way less. There's less risk. There's less time involved. There's less money involved for a studio. But the impact can potentially be higher, because instead of just hiring, you know, one person or one intern or one apprentice, you can bring on 10 people, 15 people. Like, it's almost limitless. And so that's why I'm like, you know, it's about these tactical things that anyone feels like they can do. And maybe that's why I kind of like make it sound so easy. It's like, I want you to do it, Macaela. You know, and Corey and, you know, Mac and Dash, just all of our allies and friends and people in this industry. Like, that's just one thing you can just try out. It's like, it's not that big of a deal to do, but the impact is huge.
Yeah, that's cool. And I think pooling resources of studios would be the key to that, right? Because if there was one central hub of people who wanted to be part of Fly on the Wall, and then they could be assigned out to different studios, then instead of, you know, 7 resource managers getting involved, you could trade and say, this month Newfangled's, you know, creative services manager is going to do it, and next month BN's is and then after that it's Dash, and it becomes less stress on everybody. So yeah, the more that we can team up. I want to hear more about the Double the Line that you said that AICP came, because I hadn't heard of that.
Yeah, so actually it's funny. Double the Line was kind of brought to us by a client. They said, hey, we want you to participate in this initiative. So we were like, what is this? And so it was started by the AICP, the Association of Independent Commercial Producers.
Yeah, we're in the AICP. Yeah.
So it's like a live action thing, and they created Double the Line. I think it was in 2020. And exactly. Yeah. And then it kind of disappeared. It kind of died. But we were sort of forced to do it. Like, they were like, if you want to bid on this job, you have to double the line. So we were like, oh, what is that? We found out what it was, and we said, this is actually really interesting. And so it's just a way that we can very easily, as studio owners or agency owners or people, you know, at any brand, can bring on underrepresented talent in a low risk, low cost way. So instead,
is it literally doubling the line though? Like, are you paying that underrepresented talent the same as somebody who's extremely experienced?
No, we actually, we pay them their day rate, but basically, like, let's say it's a cell animator.
Yeah.
So if we have a senior cell animator on for 10 days, then we double that line and we bring on a junior to shadow that senior. And the best part about doing that is that the junior talent walks away actually having something for their portfolio and for their reel. So it's like, hey, I worked on, you know, an Instagram or an Apple or a Google job. Check it out. And that's the hardest part about breaking into this industry. So that solves for that. And it's also, you know how hard it is, Macaela, to hire someone, right? Like, if you hire someone full time, it's extremely time intensive, time consuming, and it's risky. You know, but this allows you to try someone out, teach them some things. If they have great promise, great talent, great attitude, you can bring them on again. And when we talk to our clients about Double the Line, they love it, because they're like, oh wow, this is just like a tactical, easy thing that I can do. And we bring the junior talents on almost all of the calls with clients. And so they see that representation, they see that action, and they say, oh yeah, like, I want to be a part of this. And, you know, they spend more money. And a lot of times they cover that extra fee, and it's not a lot. Like it might be $2,000. It might be, $5,000 or less. And so we tell agencies like, hey, you can bring on, a copywriter. Maybe it's 3 days, but give people a chance, give them a shot. And this is a low risk way to do that.
Yeah, that's right.
I love that.
Thank you.
And there are so many programs and offerings that I know BN Studios has available, and even just the resources that you both use within your work to make it more inclusive. I do want to get those links from you and share that out when we have this available to everybody as well, so that way people know where to even look for this stuff after they get incredibly inspired from listening to us on this podcast. So I will ask one more delicate question, and then we will get to the inspirational stuff. But, and whoever wants to answer it can. Where is the line between being inclusive and virtuous signaling? And I know it's a delicate thing to talk about, but I do think that this is the time to kind of have that discussion. Macaela, would you like to take a crack at that one?
We have a content series at Newfangled called Nothing About Us Without Us, which is a phrase that was coined in the disability community back in the 80s. And it was really like people were trying to do things for the disability community, but not even consulting them. And so they were doing entirely the wrong things. And I think that applies to what we do now in advertising. Virtue signaling or tokenism is when you are trying to appear like you're doing the right thing for the purpose of profit. I think the main difference is if there's something to back it up. Like you said, Ricardo, it's not words, it's actions. Mm-hmm. So, in the area that I'm the most expert at is my own lived experience, and that's as a gay person. If I go to a corporation and they have gender neutral bathrooms, they represent people year round, not just during Pride. They have, I didn't go to a hairdresser the other day because they only had men's and women's haircut. I was like, ew. Like, can you do short or long, here? Because what do I count as then, like all those little details are what tell me that you mean it. And then if it's only, making your logo rainbow colored in June, then it's virtue signaling. So the way that I think about it and the way that we talk about it in the Nothing About Us Without Us series is, what are the things that you need to do before you have permission to target this audience? You have to earn your invite into that community instead of just saying like, guess what, Latin community, I'm here. Like, let's party. Yes. No. What have you done for them? And once you've done things and not just done them on your own and assumed what they need, but actually pull people in from that community and pay them what they're worth for their time to consult with you to say, here's what you could do for our community, or here's what we see as lacking. At that point, you unlock permission to advertise toward that community. If you don't do that first, it's tokenism. Mm-hmm. So at School of Motion, you guys have a scholarship program, for example. That's awesome. Now you've sort of unlocked permission from certain communities because you've actually done something to stand behind it. And I think if there were a school who were sending emails about inclusivity, but not having the scholarship program or doing actual things to stand behind it, then that's to me what makes the difference.
And it really is in those details too. You just talking about that reminded me of something David actually said on his podcast with us about the details in the wheelchair community and like being as specific. Like you can't just use a wheelchair for sports. Like there are certain details that you need to make sure you get right. Because if it's basketball in a wheelchair, those wheels are at a certain angle. They're made with certain, like there is a lot of details and thought that needs to go into all of that kind of marketing and advertising to make sure that it actually is accurate to that community. And it's not just, just light and fluffy, like you kind of put it, Macaela.
Exactly. It's always just the things that you don't know that you don't know.
Right.
And so you can't go into it assuming, oh, I know what a wheelchair looks like, I'm just going to go ahead and do this. No, you either need to take it out of your own profit or put it in the budget, but you need to pull in a consultant.
Yep.
If you are trying to target or tell the story of an underserved community, then you need to hand them the microphone.
100%. And I wanted to also just echo just the idea of virtue signaling. I think consumers can tell, like people can tell. People are not dumb, right? So there's so many brands, there's so many agencies and creative shops in our industry that have put out these virtue signals in 2020, 2021. You go back and you look at those pages, they're not updated, they're not talking about it on social media. It was all a bunch of blah, blah, blah. And so to me, it's action that separates those, the companies who are actually doing something and who are just talking about it. It just boils down to action.
I love that. And you guys have definitely put your money where your mouths are. You put in the action. You have done it in so many different ways too, from your internal teams to the clients you choose to work with to the actual work that you create. So trying to just wrap up this amazing conversation with a couple questions just for the folks that are listening. Do you think the steps that your two studios have taken to prioritize inclusivity are things that another studio could do, or do you find that maybe they can find their own ways to reach their own goals around this initiative?
No one should own inclusion, right? So it's like Ricardo said, if you can learn from one another, if the concept of the North Star helps somebody else, like please take it and run and make it better than I ever could have. I think it's a journey and we build from one another. So it's actually really important that we learn from each other and that we don't try to hoard it for ourselves. It sort of defeats the purpose. Right.
Ricardo said you wanted to share all of the resources that you're working on as well and see how people can kind of utilize that in their own ways.
Yeah, and we look at ourselves as a bridge studio. So it's basically like we want to bring on talent, teach them inclusive motion design, and have them go off into, their next jobs, their next engagements, and take what we taught them and what we learned together and then apply those things and evolve those things. So if you look at it from that mentality, being a bridge studio, we can come together with other studios and other agencies and brands and become a bridge network where we're all like practicing these inclusive techniques and we're all learning from it and we're all like evolving it at the same time.
And learning from each other too.
Yeah.
If mistakes or not, like the resources that you guys develop and then sharing that out and just continuing to make this an easier thing to get behind and to promote in everyone's own way. So it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, we just did a workshop for another studio, and they were like, "Hey, what would the fee be?" I'm like, "There's no fee. Like, we want to do this. We want to like show you what we've learned, like our hard."
Oh, you're gonna get hit up now.
Ding, ding,
Yeah,
ding.
we're a little busy right now to do those, but like if it's a brand, an enterprise, we do charge a fee. But if it's a studio, then our goal is to spread InMoDe throughout the industry. So that's what we want to do. So
and putting a dollar sign to it kind of like just puts up a barrier to it, right? It's the whole reason why we're trying to remove barriers and make this something everyone can have access to, including ways to make their own companies more inclusive. So I love it. I absolutely want to take all those resources from you, apply them to School of Motion as much as I can, but also share them with all of our audience listening, because this was a really inspiring chat. And I'm so glad you guys were both able to make it on here today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
yeah, thank you, Brittany.
Thank you.
It's so much fun, and I appreciate the platform to talk about what like is important and means the most to Macaela and myself. Like, this is awesome.
Yeah.
So thank you.
So just another way to do it, right? Spread love.
Exactly.
I'd like to thank Macaela and Ricardo for being so open and honest about this, frankly, tricky topic. I've talked with a lot of business owners over the last several years, and everyone has a different idea and approach to being inclusive. And it's great to hear from two people who are being very deliberate in the way they approach it. I also want to give Brittany props for doing such an awesome job with the interview, and I would love to know what you think about this topic. So leave a comment on YouTube or hit us up on social media at School of Motion. Make sure you're subscribed so that you can get notified when we drop new episodes of the podcast, and I'll see you soon.